Well, welcome to Getting It Right, Best Practices for Teleworkers and Their Managers. I'm Melissa Madison, Executive Director of Commuter Services, and we're so glad that you've joined us. This presentation is part of our Twin Cities Telework webinar series, and my coworker Kate Meredith, Vice President of Commuter Services, will share more about our telework resources at the end of the webinar. Next slide. I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Elham Shirazi, the principal of e-planning. Elham routinely conducts telework training sessions, and she has done so for local employers, including the City of Bloomington, Best Buy, Super Value, and Welsh companies. Elham is a nationally recognized expert in telework, and she has consulted with she has advised the White House, the US Congress, and many public entities in policy development for advancing telework, and she has worked with hundreds of companies across the United States. Elham is a longtime consultant with Commuter Services and has helped us to develop many of the telework resources that we share with employers and commuters. She has tracked the evolution of telework, and today she brings us insight on how managers and teleworkers can thrive with telework. Next slide, please. We are recording today's webinar, and we will email everyone who has registered a recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck, and you'll receive that within a week. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar, and please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions and refrain from doing that in the chat feature. So we'd like you to use the Q&A. And now I'll turn it over to Elham. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and good morning to all of you. We thought that it would be probably a good time to talk about best practices for hybrid workplace, because that has become kind of a national term now, whereby employers are, saying that we want people who are in for a few days and then can work at home a few, and employees are agreeing with that kind of an approach. So today we're going to look at the different angles for executives, for managers, and for employees. So I want to go over a few trends so that we are confirmed in our belief that this is probably where the future is going. Microsoft's done some great work recently in publishing a report and doing some surveys. And what they are showing is that over 70% of workers do want to keep flexibility as far as remote work. And yet, at the same time, 65% are craving more in-person time with their teams. And I'm sure that you probably all feel that. You like working from home for the most part, but we're all craving that, that time with our peers. And a lot of business decision makers are thinking about how they redesign physical spaces to fit this kind of an environment. And but at the same time, a lot of business leaders are faring better than their employees, meaning that about 61% say that they are thriving in this environment, and that's 23% percentages more than those without decision-making authority. So problems at the top are a little bit less, and then when we get into the workers, people want to have stronger relationships, people want to make more money, and they want to start taking vacation time. Now, we all know that a lot of us have gravitated towards remote work as a result of the pandemic. However, I do want you to keep in mind that the business reasons for teleworking that existed pre-pandemic still persist. And those are the ones that the pandemic has probably proven beautifully, which is productivity stays the same or gets better when people work remotely. However, employees are looking for flexibility, especially as they look at new jobs. and as you know, they make the case for staying with their employer. In fact, I'm going to get into this much more in depth. And it is a morale booster, because who doesn't want to miss the commute? I think we all do. And for some employers, it's always been a way to save on overhead and reduce their carbon footprint, as well as you know, reducing the stress of commuting and making sure, as we have during the pandemic, that we are resilient. Now, I wanted to, sorry, oops, skipped a few slides ahead. I wanted to actually make sure that we have an understanding of what has been happening to us during this pandemic. I am positive that a lot of you are probably feeling this, that as we have, you know, tried to stay productive and respond to everything that comes in, that we are in a bit tired. And I'm so glad that actually Microsoft put this data together, because they're showing that the number of meetings between, you know, last year at the same time and this year have increased by 148%. And I'm sure that some of you can relate to this as your days go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And there's an increase of 40.6 billion emails. The chat's gone up by 45%. And the number of people working on Office documents is up by over 66% per year. So what is happening is that this high productivity is really masking an exhausted workforce. And if I were an executive in any corporation right now, I pay a lot of attention to this data, because you know, as we talk and communicate to employees, what we do feel is that there is this sense of being overwhelmed. And I've done a lot of focus groups in this era with employees and with managers, and the fatigue, this feeling of going from meeting to meeting is persistent, you know, across the employers. Now, one of the few things that has happened, which is a good thing, as a result of the pandemic, is that our relationships have become a lot more humanized. So as people have tried to, you know, balance their home and childcare and homeschooling and you know, and other activities, and they've worked from living rooms, and I'm sure as many of you have been faced with this, with environments that might have been a little too noisy in the background, something has changed. And that is a lot of managers have had to also become comfortable in navigating in this space where you know, work has become more human. And you know, people have cried together, and you know, some of these numbers are even higher for industries that have been hurt very hard, like education, and it's continuing to get, you know, hit hard, travel and tourism and healthcare. Now, the other piece of data that I do want to share with you, and this is also consistent across the literature, and I'm sure you're going to hear it and go, oh, that's not our company. But what the research is showing is that 41% of the global workforce is thinking about leaving their current employer with a major plan to, you know, relocate or to change careers. And obviously, a lot of those people are in different generations. In fact, one of the migration patterns in the US and in England do seem to indicate that baby boomers are moving closer to their parents so that they can take care of them, and that millennials, you know, the Y and Z group, are actually moving in with parents because of the cost of living. So that might also explain why some people are thinking about changing jobs, because they are anticipating making a geographic choice. Now, the way forward obviously entails empowering people for more flexibility, whatever your organization is willing to offer. In the last webinar that I did for the Twin Cities, one of the points that I brought up was that flexibility is now available in 3 areas. One is the place of work, meaning is it the home, is it a co-working center, or is it the office? Two, there's flexibility in time for some jobs and some employees. And three is that geographic flexibility that I just spoke about. So organizations are also investing in their configuration of space and technology to bridge the two worlds, and meaning that thoughts of having all hands on deck is going to be a little bit harder to accomplish these days, because people may be in different locations, and we really need to figure out what our meeting spaces look like so that we can connect those who are remote with those who may be in the office that day. This issue of digital exhaustion has to be, I think, battled from the top all the way down, and we can talk about that a little bit more. And we do need to prioritize culture, because when people are not always at the workplace, and also social capital, how do we keep people engaged with our culture? And we do want to make sure that we are hiring, excuse me, allergy day. I'm so sorry. That we are rethinking, how we can compete for the best and the most diverse talent. These are realities of the new workforce. Now, talent is everywhere in a hybrid environment, not for every employer. Some of you may be thinking that you may limit it to, the state, or, you may, have certain mileage requirements of how far people can live from work. But there are jobs that are going to be, all throughout the US that people will take advantage of. And just yesterday, I was talking to an employer who had, very easily from Georgia hired people from 2 other states. And in fact, that helped some of their caseload because those people from the other states were willing to do shifts that their own people weren't. So, so we do have to realize that, that we'll probably be recruiting from a much bigger market. Now, the reasons we need to maintain culture are because, everybody stays with an organization because they like it, they like their work, they like the organization's culture. So leaders do need to take a bigger role, A, in being visible, and B, in terms of articulating, what are their goals and direction. And managers need to make sure that people do have a sense of shared purposes, and not just how individual team members attribute to outcomes, but how the whole team is important. And accountability is going to be critical. Maybe during the pandemic, there were reasons we couldn't hold everyone to the same level of accountability, but we do need to make sure that those measures are in place as we move forward. I did talk about leaders being present, and a lot of employees do want to see their leadership as present and accessible, and this is harder to accomplish. However, actually, I think that contrary to what it says from Forbes, that it may even be easier doing this visibility, in terms of being virtual, where the leadership of the organization can have, maybe 5 minutes of a meeting or 10 minutes of a meeting just to bring everybody together. Obviously, we do need to be in an era where there's a lot of open communications, because that's how you build trust. And if we want to be remote, there has to be trust in the workplace. Now, while the hybrid experience is likely here to stay, we do need to create places where people want to be. So this does mean, making sure that we redesign space. As you can see, the space here was reconfigured with plexiglass, which makes it easier. And it looks like this was kind of a shared space before, but people are not sitting closely together. In these times, being a manager has changed. And we do find that managers have to lead with empathy. And this is, everything that I've read, everywhere that I have, done research, points to this, that Empathy is part of this new culture of remote work, and it's here to stay. And this will require organizations and HR departments to not only deepen their managers' skills, but also train them so that they, are in the proper mindset to recognize if, people are feeling unincluded, isolated, lonely, depressed, unattached from the team, etc. Because yes, a manager has to now be also creative in terms of the psychology of the workplace. Now, two of the terms that have become part and parcel of this new era are synchronous communications versus asynchronous. And those of you who may have an affiliation with the education field or who have children in school are probably familiar with what this means. And this means that there are meetings where we do have to be together to exchange ideas and to talk. And then there are meetings that can be done in an asynchronous fashion, meaning there won't be a meeting, but that people get to work on topics alone. And it frees up the time from going from meeting to meeting, from lecture to lecture, from presentation to presentation, to actually providing project time. So organizations need to look closely at how often meetings are being scheduled, and they need to make sure that if there is a discussion that's there's just one person presenting, perhaps it can be pre-recorded, and employees can attend that on their own time, as opposed to all be together in one meeting, and reduce the length of meetings. I know a lot of these meetings are up to an hour, and when we give people even 10 minutes at the end, everyone's happy. But I would strive for even shorter meetings. We have a lot of Zoom and Teams fatigue going on in this environment. So maybe even 45 minutes or 30 minutes is a better time frame. And some meetings don't even need to be longer than 15 minutes. However, it does mean that whoever is running the meeting has to be an excellent moderator, an excellent facilitator, and have an agenda beforehand. And all meetings are recorded, and we are aware of how they're going to be broadcast. So please, if you are feeling the same as most of us are, that we're overwhelmed in this environment, do give some thought to how much your teams are meeting and whether or not every meeting is necessary. Now, obviously, measuring productivity has been an art where I think a lot of managers have probably realized that what they're measuring is no longer, via some form of software or when employees logged on and off, but it's really dependent on communications, how quickly people respond to emails and return phone calls. I also do want to stress that the timeline for returning emails has also gotten out of hand, and people are presenting daily deadlines. That has become a little bit hard for everyone to, respond in real time. So maybe we need to be a little bit more considerate in terms of how much we're sending to someone and at what hour, because sometimes when we send an email at a late hour, people are more tempted to read it when they receive it and answer. So do cluster your emails and maybe have them go out in the morning as opposed to late at night. And we're seeing people set goals. We're seeing people measuring, employees the same way as they are in the office, as they are remotely. And of course, timesheets are still important. However, the bulk of the productivity is being measured by, the responsiveness and meeting of goals. Now, with some jobs, like in call center jobs, obviously you can see metrics, but not every job is so easily quantifiable, so you always rely on the quality. Pardon me. Now, so to manage a hybrid environment, we want to ensure that we have leader buy-in. So, so that we have an environment that supports both groups, remotely and in office. Some people think that an office will be the place to meet in the future. That is not necessarily true. The office may, be there for times when people need a break from working from home, or when the home is busy and they need some project time, or when they're missing the camaraderie of other people in the organization, and they just want to come back and feel that they're part of a workforce that comes to work and goes home. So in terms of sharing of information, we got to share it across the organization, whether people are remote or in the office. Do please invest in tools. If you have delayed that investment in your technology, hoping that everyone will come back, do start thinking about how you can improve your technical abilities, or maybe provide people with the stipend for bandwidth, or to pay for their connectivity so that they can be as effective. I think we a lot of times in the past we were forgetting people who were remote. So if they called into a meeting, we actually allowed them to fall asleep because we didn't call on them and we didn't ask questions. So always make sure that as a manager you're including your remote workers, and it might work out that you have different programs for different types of employees, and you do need to keep this in mind as you relax maybe some start of time and end of time hours, but retain core hours within your organization. And visibility and openness is very important, as well as displaying promotability and people who are actually going higher up in the organization in this environment. Now, this data from Harvard Business Management got me a little bit concerned that 40% of this manager group that they had studied doubted their ability to manage remote staff. And I think that it's really unrealistic for us to expect managers to get into this role with a lot of expertise and also tools. So, perhaps this is a good time for your organization to delve into some training for managers, and some training that's deliverable oriented, and we'll go over some of those points shortly. But it may mean that your management team does need a little bit of retooling. So one of the ways that we feel that this is working really well is if managers are involved pretty much on a weekly basis in what their teleworkers and their teams are doing. So, prior to the beginning of the next week, maybe assist your employees, through either a meeting by phone or video to discuss the scope of the work for the next week. If you need to, probably give them some direct objectives and deliverables and set time frames. However, we have found that as cultures get more matured in the remote work environment, it becomes easier and easier to ask the employees to come up with a list and basically say, here's what I'm going to do this week, here are the goals I'm going to accomplish. And then at the end of the week, they basically get together with their managers or with their teams to talk about what they accomplished and what fell through the cracks and for whatever reason. So the review of the work is really happening on a weekly basis, and hopefully as your teams get more educated, or as they have become more educated during the pandemic, they are able to produce a list on an individual basis for what they're going to do. But once a week, make sure that you meet your employees by phone or preferably by video, just to see how they're doing, engaged, how they're feeling, and and all those other important aspects that come with both remote work and with in-person work. And your style of management obviously will be different based on employees with different backgrounds. You may find yourself directing or coaching employees who are newer to the workforce, or who are, who need mentoring, so that you're probably giving them more direction and more coaching. In fact, some of those employees may need to come in more often. And then there are employees at the other end of the spectrum, which are more mature. They may be boomers, and they may have been with your organization for a long time, so you can advise and delegate very quickly. Now, this is not to say that younger people can't be delegated to. It all means that you just have to be at a certain skill level in order to be able to know exactly what you're supposed to do in your job. Some employers find that offering a template. Now, this is just a very simple template. You don't have to use it, but where an employee can just say, what is the task they're working on? What is it deliverable? And then at the end of the week, they just write down what they accomplished, and an estimated hours and actual hours. It may even be too complicated. If you don't need a form, don't use a form, but it's good to get something in writing so that you're both you as a manager and the employee are both agreeing to exactly what is being done. Now, it's important to also assess as managers as to how our communications are going to change. And a lot of people forget the phone in this environment. I do want you to remember your old instrument, your good old phone. And sometimes you don't need to video conference, especially internally if you're talking to team members. Some people don't mind impromptu communications, meaning that if you need me, call me. And some people prefer it electronically. So send a text first and then call. I think that really needs to be clear. If you do not want, as a manager or as an employee, for people to call you. I mean, for me, people can call me all the time. If I'm busy, I don't pick up, and I get a message. And, or people text me and I respond later. But this has to be something that you establish right away. And I think in a way it cuts down on, having to have meetings all the time, because if you have a 5-minute question, why spend, 30 minutes on a meeting? And we need to be explicit as to what communication channels are to be used. I have worked with employees who basically have always said, I will not respond to text, just use email, and schedule time with me on Teams if we're going to, be working together. Now, can there be flex hours while teleworking? That's something that, again, as managers, you need to weigh in on. Can people start a little later, end a little later, or start earlier, end, a little bit earlier? And are there core hours? Obviously, core hours are very important to most organizations. And I think whatever they are, if it's 10 to 2, make sure that everybody understands. That's when we do our meetings. That's when we, expect everybody to be available and accessible. But it may vary from department to department and individual to individual. All about communication. So, and actually a good segue into the next slide, the issues of accessibility, how people can be contacted, are very important. More and more employers are going to soft phones, and it's a way to save on not having to provide employees with a cell phone. Some employers don't. And, for some employees, that's a burden. So you do need to assess these things going forward. What we used during the pandemic as a Band-Aid may not be the way we will navigate into the future. So, we want to make sure that there are enough, communication channels open. And we do want to make sure that we do have calendars that are available and people can see when we're busy and when we're in a meeting. And so, if you use Outlook, whatever you use for your calendars, make sure that everybody is paying attention to, putting in what that their times are for. and as well as times that they're, it might be project time, so they don't want to be interrupted, and it might be personal non-available time. Yes, schools are essential to us getting back to somewhat of a normal, society. However, schools are also going through their own changes. Just yesterday, one of my colleagues called, and her child in kindergarten was sent home because someone in the kindergarten class was infected. And so we're going to see patterns where, children have to come home, or even, sometimes older kids who are in high school, middle school, because of, certain things that are outside of our control. Hopefully, as people are getting vaccinated, schools will become safer for all. But we know that, some of those younger, generations haven't even been tested. So I think we're still going to be in limbo for a little bit, as this whole pandemic persists and, interrupts. But hopefully we'll see some levels of normalcy. Now, as far as communications, please do establish a virtual water cooler. You won't believe how many employees miss that. So this might be a time across different functionalities where, for 15 minutes, people can just get online and talk to each other if they want to. If they want to take a break, they can take a break. FaceTime does help build relationships, as I mentioned. Also use the telephone. And I'm not sure if this is part of my presentation today, but I do want to share with you that a lot of people would like to have some of their social exchanges during the work hours as opposed to after work hours, because when work is done, they want to be done. And just as before, we used to have company lunches, or when people could sit down and have coffee. Do schedule, some virtual coffee or virtual lunch for people who want to participate or not. And also team building exercises. Now, as far as teamwork, there has to be clear direction from management in terms of attendance. So yes, you need to be, very clear on whether remote is acceptable. Hopefully it will be, and because it will give people more flexibility. And every meeting has to obviously, be clearly planned. And those 15-minute huddles with people in the office and people remote are really helpful to get everyone excited to take the rest of the day on, to themselves, and to create that team camaraderie that might have existed just because we got to the work at the same time. Working alone for days can cause isolation and depression. And, if you find your employees spending a lot of time just working at home and things aren't right, do suggest, hey, maybe you should come in on, just be very gentle, but, come in for a few days, and, maybe it will be helpful for you to be in the office and feel the vibes of the office. And obviously training is critical. Sometimes people feel that coming into the office for training is a lot more helpful because they get help, in person as they're trying to learn new systems. Now, managers, I think I've mentioned these. So, do have these short-term huddles, virtual breaks, and trust is a huge element in this environment. It has always been in teleworking, but you want to make sure your employees are communicating with you and involving you in their solutions. It's really good to send weekly messages, improve morale and optimism. If you stop doing that, take that back on. Sometimes it's good for upper management to, maybe send some of those monthly messages, and make sure that employees have work and life more and more as we open up, because a lot of people have had their lives intermingled with work, and their days are very long, and because they haven't been able to go out, they just keep working and doing things at home. Now is the time that hopefully, with masks and vaccinations, some of those barriers are removed, and that we are also problem solving. Now I'm going to change the tone a little bit and talk about the teleworker. The teleworker does have to create and maintain a safe and a quiet and productive work environment at home, because you want to create trust. And yes, to the degree possible, noise should be kept away. We know that we've seen, during the pandemic, once in a while, a little one pops up or a pet pops up, on a screen. It's okay. We need to have empathy. But, you just want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with communication or doesn't get too noisy. But trust is very, very important. Now, adjustments for employees. Obviously, they have these same questions. What's the impact on teamwork going to be? And, teamwork should continue irrespective of the place where it's happening. And by the way, please make sure that employees are not having meetings in their homes. If there are meetings, they do need to come to the office or meet somewhere in public, because that opens up Pandora's box. How will my manager know that I'm working? I think that hopefully that your managers know by now how you are working, but if they need to know more, that's okay. We don't want to be micromanaged, but obviously the deliverables have to be there, the numbers have to be there. And for some employees, 5 days a week will not work at all, and they really have this craving. Something about under 8% of the population doesn't want to work at home, every day. I know it's a small number, but it's important to keep in mind there's some people who may never want to work from home. So you want to have a culture that allows them to come into the office, and hopefully your employees are and you as employees are making those to-do lists on an ongoing basis and dealing with distractions in the home environment, just as important as it was in terms of goal setting with managers. I think as employees, do make sure that you also, if your manager is not taking the steps to do this, that on a weekly basis, you are defining your objectives and deliverables. Some people may even do it on a daily basis. I have a weekly to-do list, and then I have daily to-do lists, so that I can keep track of everything. Even for yourself, established time frames. If your manager doesn't ask you, send them an email saying these are some of the things that I'm going to be working on, and say if I don't hear back from you, I'll continue to work on these. By the end of the report week, hopefully you can send a quick email or meet with your manager and have this process that repeats. A lot of employees are now meeting several times with each other, through meetings or by phone call. But there's definitely a team meeting that's conducted on a weekly basis and an individual meeting that's conducted between a manager and an employee. So I think once with the team and once with the manager should hopefully get you there. But if not, obviously there are other ways to get information. If you have forgotten these skills, please do remember that you just don't want to go from bed to your desk. Have a morning ritual. Get dressed, not dressed up. Just be comfortable, and also at the same time do observe whatever dress code there is at the office. So that you don't look unprofessional if you're behind a video. Have those breaks with your coworkers. Try to schedule time with your coworkers just to have lunch, whether it's over video or over a phone call. That helps. Or if you're both going to be in the office on the same day, that might be a good idea. Breaks are critical. Do not work nonstop in the same position. Do take breaks, stretch, move ergonomically. You will hurt yourself if you don't. And that little mid-morning break and the mid-afternoon break really help to rejuvenate. Try to eat lunch away from your desk unless you're sharing lunch with a coworker through a video. But it's good to get up, go make a healthy lunch. Sometimes on your break or after work or before work, you may want to go for walks. A lot of people actually say that they miss the commute because it was a buffer between work and home. And I think a really good substitute for that is meditation or mindfulness. So maybe in the morning before you start, practice, 10, 15 minutes of mindfulness. Some of those apps are so inexpensive, and, they just help you calm down and get to work in a calm fashion, especially at the end of the day, to, unstress before you go and step in and, deal with the family. Take 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, to kind of calm down from what has happened in your workday. Because we do want to keep the two separate as much as we can. Stay away from the news and the radio. They just work overtime these days, and they can be very disturbing. Or, once you start following that stuff, it's hard to work and to, it's nice not to, because a lot of the news can be disruptive. So just give yourself peace of mind. Have an end of the day ritual, which says, this is when I'm going to stop. And if you have not taken vacation or personal time off during this pandemic, it's time to do it. Even if you're not going to travel far, just unplug. It's very important that you unplug. Now, just a few more tips. Make sure you have a dedicated workspace at home that provides a safe environment. Make sure you have surface space to work on. I talked about having a routine. I talked about being organized. But, the picture I think is really nice here, where this employee is feeling, really good, and they have a surface space. And what they're missing is a remote keypad. But let's talk a little bit about that. Make sure your desk at home, you have a designated desk for work. If you live alone, you may use the dining room table. But if you live with others, that may not be the best place to work. You don't have to have a separate room, but you may want to have a space that's separate. Just say, this is where I work. And don't use glass, because glass can break. Make sure you invest in a chair, because you can't work in a dining room chair for the purposes of remote work. It should be an ergonomic chair that gives you back support, has armrests, is on rollers. You have to pay attention to lighting. Make sure that lighting is kind of, behind, if you're using, a monitor, it's kind of behind your monitor. Direct sunlight is not a good solution. And, you do want to be conscious of safety in terms of where your cables are and where your equipment is when you're configuring that workspace. Make sure, of course, you're using surge protectors, and, always have some solutions. Okay, what if my Wi-Fi drops? Can I still use my phone? Will that enable me to participate in some meetings? Nowadays people can get into Zoom and Teams and all that with their phones as well. But these are things to think about. And of course, noise that I think I've mentioned. But that safety at home is very important. Now, the message at home to family and friends is, I'm at home, mommy or daddy's at home, but we are working. So we need quiet time when we're working, and decide when interruptions are okay. They may be the same times that they're okay in the office. Have rules for what you have at home, which is your employer's property. So other people cannot use, the equipment or whatever you need. And, agree up front about with your managers about how you balance your work during the day and your, your home responsibilities. Now, health and wellness are at the top of this. Mental health is really important these days. And in order to stay healthy, to stay happy, it's good to have a regular schedule. I think you can connect the dots here. Stay connected with family and friends. Don't become lonely. Keep your immune system strong. Prioritize personal hygiene. Yes, we can go for weeks without showering, but will we feel good? Probably not. Exercise and stay active. Get fresh air. Stay informed. Limit media consumption. A lot of this is common sense. Do try to have boundaries on work schedules. There has to be an end to the workday and a beginning of the workday. And, engage in activities that bring you joy. If you've forgotten about your hobbies, get back into them. And, constantly share with your coworkers what's making it easier for you to work in this environment. So managers, don't forget, empathy is critical. Staying connected is critical. Over-connected is not good. We've talked about isolation, loneliness, and it's really important that you have an understanding of what your employee assistance programs are like, or have HR confirm them, so that if employees need support, that they can go to those sources. And at this point, I'm going to hand this back to Kate to talk about our resources.
Thank you so much, Alham. You've just provided a wealth of information that's so valuable for managers and teleworkers, and we really appreciate that. Before we get to questions, and I encourage people to type in any questions that they've thought of during the presentation, is a good time to do that now. I just wanted to go over and highlight some of the resources that Commuter Services provides. So we have a brand new website. It's called Twin Cities Telework, and it can be found at www.tctelework.com. We're very excited. We just launched it. The free employer resources that are available include sample telework policies and agreements, tips for manager success, a sample telework log, and home office safety and ergonomics guidance. We also have resources to help employees get set up for a long-term telework arrangement, as well as useful tips on how to avoid pitfalls and distractions, and how to strike the right work-life balance while living and working from home. Today's webinar is the third in our Twin Cities Telework series. Please visit the website to view previous webinars and presentation slides, and sign up for future webinars covering topics of importance in the world of telework. And while you're there, please be sure to sign up for our telework newsletter. So with that, let's move on to questions. Next slide. And I see a question. Question is, do you have recommendations for how to start the conversation about rethinking practices around meetings, e.g. shortening them, alternatives, canceling them? You want to take that, Alham?
Sure. I think that the best way to educate people within your organization is to start with the data. And I think it's really important to share some of the data pieces that I have provided you here, and also because these will be available to you, as well as the last webinar we did include a lot about Zoom fatigue and work from home fatigue and how to overcome them. I would just say, I would, if you're an employee, start with, I attended this, webinar, and here's some things that were brought to our attention, thought we should share it. I bet you people are waiting to have those conversations because everybody that I work with, that I talk to, is overwhelmed by the pace of meetings and this constant communication. We wake up to 70 emails, we go to bed, trying to answer them and then do our work and get in meetings. It's just become really, really hard. And believe me, this is not just from my own personal experience, it's from what I'm picking up from everyone. Just share, the sources for all the data I've used are on every single page, and go and download those reports and share them with your management and say, this is maybe a good piece. That Microsoft report is really an excellent report to share with your management because there's so many highlights in it about this new future. And as well as some of the other data sources we've used throughout. So there are citations. I think when you have data that supports how you're, you assess people are feeling, it's a much stronger argument.
Wonderful, thank you, Alham. That's a great question. Good answer. So we are doing good on time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'll invite again for people to put in their questions in Q&A, and we'll just give it a minute or two to do that. And if you think of questions, after we end today, please email either Melissa Madison, our executive director, or myself, Kate Meredith, and you see our contact information on the screen. We're very happy to answer questions and have a conversation about telework.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. Do you want to go back to that last slide, Elham? Just so we
Sure. With the information,
keep that
yes.
up. Yeah, just to have
Yeah.
a minute. Perfect. Okay, well, I'm not seeing new questions. I'm sure you're all processing what you heard today, and I want to thank our presenter, Elham Shirazi, for providing a wonderful presentation, and we really appreciate your time and your talent, Elham, as always.
Yes. And for those of you who may have joined after the webinar started, we will be sending a link to this recorded webinar and also the slide deck to everyone who registered, and you'll receive that within a week. So with that, it does not look like any other questions popped up in the Q&A. And so we'd like to thank everyone for attending, and thank you again, Elham. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.